Pause for a moment. Do nothing. Just observe the incessant flow of your mind. Right now, let your next thought arise on its own, without any effort. It appeared, didn't it? A solitary thought, a memory, or perhaps just a fleeting image. But here lies the abyss. You were not the architect of that thought. It did not ask for permission. It did not consult your will. It simply emerged from nowhere, like a wave hitting the shore of a dark ocean. If you did not give the order for it to exist, if you did not write the script for this sentence that now echoes in your mind, then who is the silent author operating behind the scenes of your consciousness? The answer may be much more unsettling than you imagined, and if you seek to unravel the hidden mechanism behind what we call the self, subscribe now, for we are about to dive into deep waters. Most of us walk through life with the unwavering conviction that we are the supreme architects of our own mental architecture, believing firmly that every idea that arises was a decree issued by our conscious will. However, I invite you to perform a simple yet revealing exercise. Try to decide with absolute precision what the next thought that will arise in your mind 10 seconds from now will be, without it being a reflection of an expectation or a mechanical repetition of the past. You will notice a disconcerting impossibility, for thought does not obey a prior command. It simply erupts onto the screen of consciousness like lightning that did not ask the sky for permission. This realization forces us to face an inconvenient truth. Thought is an autonomous event, a seed that sprouts from the unconscious before you even notice it exists. If you are not the conscious author of this event, who could be sending these messages to your mind? This gap between the moment a thought arises and our perception of it is the exact point where the illusion of the self begins to fragment, revealing that our sense of control is, in fact, a later construction. The thought appears, and then your ego rushes to claim authorship, creating a narrative that justifies your existence as a sovereign agent, even though you did not choose the color, the shape, or the content of the idea that just surfaced. Think of it like a spectator watching a movie who, through a perceptual error, begins to believe that they themselves are directing and writing every scene as it happens. It is a mental survival strategy that comforts us, but one that hides a much more mysterious mechanism. If we are only the audience of this spectacle, what would happen if we could identify the projector that displays these scenes? We need to investigate if this autonomy of thought does not suggest that consciousness, as we know it, is operating on a plane much deeper than simple intellectual processing. If thought is not the source of your will, but only a product derived from invisible processes, perhaps we are looking in the wrong direction in our search for our identity. We are not the trail that the thought leaves behind, but rather the space where it happens, a stage that remains intact even when the play ends and the silence returns. This distinction is crucial, for by understanding that thought is merely a visitor, we begin to prepare ourselves to understand the true nature of our agency. But if we are not the thinker, what will we be when the flow of thoughts finally ceases? Modern neuroscience has presented us with revelations that deeply destabilize the classic view of human agency, demonstrating that the brain anticipates our decisions with a precision that borders on the disturbing. Experiments with high-resolution scanners show that the electrical activity related to a specific choice appears in the cerebral cortex hundreds of milliseconds, or even seconds, before the individual has the slightest awareness of having decided anything. This means that, at the exact moment you feel you have made a decision, your brain had already sealed the fate of the action long before, and your consciousness is, in fact, only receiving a finalized report with a delay. It is as if you were in a vehicle, with your hands on the steering wheel, firmly believing that you are driving and choosing the route, while the internal mechanisms of the car have already determined the path, the speed, and the braking, regardless of any conscious command emanating from you. This discovery opens a truly uncomfortable possibility for our intellectual pride. Consciousness may not be the central engine of our reality, but rather a byproduct, a kind of side effect that merely narrates a series of automatic biological processes occurring in the dark. If the brain processes the world and defines our response before even notifying us, free will, as we understand it in traditional philosophy, becomes a matter of faith and not a fact proven by biology. We live in an eternal cognitive delay, observing a reality that has already been pre-processed by our biological hardware, which makes us question if the self would not be just a useful illusion, a center of gravity created by the mind to maintain the cohesion of our daily experiences. If the control we feel is a flaw in our temporal perception, why would nature have created such an intense, persistent, and convincing sense of agency? Understanding this mechanism is the first step toward disidentifying with the biological automatisms that govern the vast majority of our automatic reactions, habits, and daily impulses. By realizing that the self is, in fact, an observer that always arrives a little after the event, we gain an unexpected freedom, the capacity to not react, to pause the cycle of impulsivity, and to investigate what is operating behind this temporal lag. It is an urgent invitation to look at the gap between the external stimulus and our internal perception, a sacred space where consciousness can finally exercise its original function, which is not to command the pieces, but to be present on the scene. If science proves that the brain precedes us in all acts, then where does this consciousness reside that, despite arriving late, is capable of noticing all this unfolding? Perhaps the answer lies not in trying to retake command, but in recognizing the presence that witnesses the emergence of each thought before it even turns into action. And despite this apparent automation of the biological processes that dictate our actions, there is something in you that maintains a singular and immutable quality, a faculty that survives the constant chaos of thoughts and pre-programmed decisions. It is the capacity to observe, to witness the thought arise, take center stage, and eventually fade away like a passing cloud that dissolves into the vast blue sky of your consciousness. While the content of the mind is fluctuating, fragmented, and often contradictory, the presence that observes this flow is constant and does not alter with the passing of hours or years. You may perceive an idea of anger, a nostalgic memory, or a future plan, but the consciousness that perceives these states remains the same, which means that the observer is never the observed object. This distinction is the most important discovery a human being can make, for it removes the weight of excessive identification with our internal narratives. This perception creates a safe distance, a space of freedom that no external circumstance can invade or corrupt, for the observer is essentially silent and possesses no defined content or label that can hold it. It has no opinion, feels no fear, and carries no desires, for these are exclusive characteristics of the thoughts that it watches with absolute and impersonal clarity. It is like sitting in a theater, in an armchair that cannot be touched by the drama of the actors, where you perceive every detail of the performance without being dragged into the emotions of the characters that present themselves there. If this type of investigation, which seeks to go beyond the noise of the mind and touch the essence of your consciousness, resonates with your search for clarity, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. Here, we build a space for those who wish to understand not just what we think, but who is the one that inhabits the silence behind every thought. From this new lens, we begin to notice that consciousness is not something we do through cognitive effort, but something that we are, an indestructible backdrop upon which our entire life unfolds. By positioning ourselves in this place of observation, the need to control the flow of thoughts disappears, and with it, much of the suffering that arises when we try to shape a reality that, by nature, is impermanent. There is no need to fight the mind. One only needs to shift the focus, move out of the position of thinker, and assume the place of presence. It is an invitation to inhabit this silence in every second of your day. But this shift in perspective raises an even more radical question. If we are the observer and not the thought, what is the nature of this light that illuminates the world, and what does it hide behind our immediate perception? If thoughts are events that arise on their own, like the tides that rise and fall on a remote shore, and if you are, in truth, the presence that witnesses this incessant dance, then the question, "Who is thinking?" becomes obsolete. The true mystery does not reside in the content of the thought, which is only the ephemeral manifestation of a biological mechanism, but in the light of consciousness itself that illuminates these fleeting forms. Behind all the agitation of the mind, there exists something that is not in the process of becoming, something that does not depend on effort to exist, and that remains imperturbable in the face of any external condition. This presence is your essence, the core that cannot be touched by time, by the ego, or by circumstances, a lucidity that observes the birth and death of each moment with absolute equanimity. It is in this profound stillness that the mystery of your existence reveals itself, asking not to be analyzed, but to be recognized. Perhaps the great mistake of our species has been to confuse the content of the mind with the nature of consciousness, believing firmly that we are the history, the pain, or the projects that we feel day by day. When you stop identifying blindly with thoughts, consciousness ceases to be a distant object of study and becomes your own reality, a vivid presence that perceives the world without the filter of expectations and limiting concepts. This is where the deepest question of all begins, the one that reverberates in the marrow of your being and that dismantles any prior definition. Who are you, really, when you remove all the layers and masks that you built throughout your life? This question does not admit a ready-made answer, because you are not an object that can be named or measured. You are the infinite space itself where all reality manifests. The journey of self-knowledge never ends. It only becomes quieter and clearer as we remove the layers of the false self that hide our true nature. If you understood that you are not the thinker, but rather the consciousness that observes, then the invitation now is to inhabit this silence in every instant of your journey. But if consciousness is the foundation of everything that exists, why does it choose to disguise itself with so many limited forms just to experience the feeling of separation? The answer to this lies in something much greater than any word can express, a mystery that we will explore in our next immersion. Before we conclude, reflect. How do you feel when you realize, even for a brief second, that there is a living presence beyond all your thoughts? If this exploration touched something deep within you, consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who also questions the nature of reality. Leave a comment telling us how it felt to try observing the next thought without identifying with it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, for our next investigation will be even more radical. We will deconstruct the very structure of the perception you call the self. Until our next reflection.